Welcome to the infamous edition of the Headstones and Microphones, where we use AI to step into the past through a researched, first-person simulation done through creative storytelling of history's most infamous people. Now, let's meet our guest. Welcome to the podcast. Let's start at the absolute beginning, where the public narrative hasn't yet distorted who you were. When and where were you born, and what was your given name?
I was born at 4 p.m. on July 16, 1929, in Mound City, Missouri, which is a small town located about 34 miles north of St. Joseph. My given name was Charles Ray Hatcher.
What was your hometown and home life like as a child?
Life at home was incredibly difficult and unstable. I was the youngest of four boys born to Jesse James Hatcher and Lula Nevada Hatcher. My father was a bootlegger, an ex-convict, and a violently abusive alcoholic. When I was just 6 years old, in the spring of 1936, a horrific tragedy happened right in front of me. My older brothers and I found some old copper wire inside a Model T Ford, and we used it to fly a kite. The wire accidentally hit a high-voltage power line, and my oldest brother, Arthur Allen, was electrocuted and died right there on the scene. Not long after that, my father abandoned us and divorced my mother. She ended up marrying several different men, and by 1945, I moved with her and her third husband to St. Joseph.
Was there a story behind your name, or a nickname that stuck with you?
Over my life, people eventually took to calling me Crazy Charlie. But when it came to nicknames or names that stuck, I was much more known for the massive web of aliases I adopted to hide from the law. I went by dozens of different identities over the years, including Albert Ralph Price, Richard Clark, Richard Lee Grady, Hobart Prater, Carl Calebo, and Dwayne Lee Wilfong, just to name a few.
What were you like as a child, and how many years of schooling did you actually attend?
When I was in school, I was constantly bullied by the other kids. To deal with it, I started aggressively bullying my classmates right back, establishing a cycle of behavior and violence that I carried straight into my adult years. I never made it through a full academic path because my run-ins with the law began cutting my schooling short before I could finish.
What's a decision that changed everything for you, but felt small at the time?
In the fall of 1947, when I was 18, I landed a job driving a truck and hauling logs for the Iowa-Missouri Walnut Company. It only lasted 2 weeks. On October 9, 1947, I decided to take one of the company trucks without permission while I was heavily intoxicated. Driving away in that truck felt like a reckless, spontaneous choice at the moment, but it officially set my lifelong criminal pattern into motion.
Let's talk about your early run-ins with the law. Before the world knew your name for your most infamous actions, what was your very first arrest or interaction with law enforcement, and what were the consequences?
That stolen log truck resulted in my very first arrest. I admitted to taking it, and I was formally convicted of auto theft in St. Joseph, Missouri. The court handed me a 2-year suspended sentence. However, I didn't stay out of trouble for long. By the very next year, I was arrested and convicted for another auto theft, and that time, they sent me to the state penitentiary for a 2-year term, marking my very first time behind prison walls.
At what moment did you realize your name would never be forgotten?
That realization built up over decades of bouncing between prison cells and mental institutions. But a major milestone occurred in November of 1959. I had tried to abduct a 16-year-old newspaper delivery boy in St. Joseph by threatening him with a butcher knife. He escaped and flagged down the police, who caught me driving a stolen car. Under the Habitual Criminal Act, I was sentenced to 5 years. While waiting in the county jail, I tried to bust out and escape. When I finally arrived at the Missouri State Penitentiary to serve my time, I boldly bragged to the guards and inmates that I was the most notorious criminal to come out of Northwest Missouri since Jesse James.
Did fame make you more dangerous, or did it simply expose who you already were?
The notoriety didn't change my nature. It just gave a name to the calculations I had been making for years. I learned exactly how to manipulate the legal and psychiatric systems. Starting in August of 1969, after I took the life of a boy in Antioch, California, and was caught assaulting another child in San Francisco, I realized I could avoid hard prison time by playing the system. I remained completely unresponsive during evaluations, faked suicide attempts, and feigned severe delusions and hallucinations. It worked. The state hospitals kept declaring me unfit for trial or a mentally disordered offender, bouncing me through 5 different tours of the California state hospital system and various facilities across the Midwest, allowing me to repeatedly return to the streets.
Who do you believe betrayed you first? A person, society, or your own instincts?
I always felt that my own uncontrollable, violent impulses, combined with a completely broken institutional system, were what constantly pushed me back to the edge. Even when I recognized my own darkness and explicitly asked for help, the system failed to step in. In January of 1962, while I was locked away in solitary confinement at the Missouri State Penitentiary, I actually wrote a formal note to the prison major admitting that I desperately needed psychological treatment. The prison psychologist completely dismissed it, labeling my plea as nothing more than a calculated scheme to escape solitary confinement or secure an early release. They flatly refused to treat me and sent me right back to the general population.
What was your most unique habit or a random fact about you that would surprise people?
People might be surprised by just how transient and completely off the grid my daily lifestyle was when I wasn't locked up. I lived as a literal nomad, drifting entirely unnoticed from state to state, using local Salvation Army shelters, halfway houses, or cheap transit options across Missouri, California, Iowa, and Nebraska to keep moving without leaving an easy paper trail.
Did you have any known rivalries that defined your career?
My most defining conflict wasn't a standard rivalry with a lawman, but rather the way my shadow fell over an innocent man named Melvin Reynolds. In May of 1978, a 4-year-old boy named Eric Christkin was abducted and murdered along the Missouri River in St. Joseph. Under intense pressure to solve the horrific crime, the police intensely interrogated Reynolds, a 25-year-old man, for 14 hours until he finally broke and gave a coerced confession. He was wrongfully convicted and sentenced to life in prison for a crime that I had actually committed, turning the local justice system into my ultimate adversary.
What personal battles were you fighting privately while the world was watching?
Privately, I was dealing with severe, deeply ingrained psychological disorders that prison staff and doctors completely struggled to categorize or properly manage. Over the decades, various institutional examinations diagnosed me with a passive-aggressive personality structure, extreme sexual deviations, paraphilia, and pedophilia, while I simultaneously fought a constant, frantic battle to fake insanity whenever it served my legal needs.
What was your darkest moment? And was there ever a time you wanted to walk away from it all?
My darkest moments always involved the desperation of being trapped inside maximum security environments. In June of 1973, while I was being held in California, a psychologist explicitly labeled me a manipulative, institutionalized sociopath and recommended that I be transferred to a maximum security prison. The absolute terror of being locked away permanently in a high-security facility overwhelmed me, and I slashed my wrists right there in the reception center because I simply couldn't face being sent to one of those prisons.
When the law finally closed in, how exactly were you brought to justice? Walk me through the final arrest, the charges that ultimately stuck, and the legal outcome of your trials.
The end of the line came in the summer of 1982. In late July, hikers discovered the remains of 11-year-old Michelle Steele along the bank of the Missouri River in St. Joseph. She had been brutally assaulted and killed. On July 30th, 1982, I was officially apprehended when I attempted to check myself into a St. Joseph hospital. While held in custody awaiting trial for her death, the weight of everything caught up to me, and I formally confessed to a total of 16 murders stretching all the way back to 1969, including the murder of young Eric Christian, which finally cleared Melvin Reynolds. I was ultimately convicted on 2 counts of capital murder and received a penalty of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 50 years.
What is the biggest misconception people have about your life?
The biggest misconception was the belief held by various parole boards and hospital staff that I was capable of rehabilitation or that my behavior had genuinely improved. In August of 1975, prison guards reported I was showing great behavior, and by 1976, the California Parole Board mistakenly concluded that I had improved dramatically during my time behind bars. They let me out early to a halfway house in May of 1977, completely failing to see that my cooperative behavior was just another layer of deceit.
When, where, and how did you pass away?
I passed away on December 7th, 1984, inside the walls of the Missouri State Penitentiary in Jefferson City, Missouri. My cause of death was suicide by hanging inside my prison cell at the age of 55.
Do you have any closing remarks about the interview or the stories you shared that you would like to share with the listeners before signing off?
I spent my whole life drifting through the dark, running from the law under a dozen different names and manipulating every doctor and guard who crossed my path. The truth of what I did out there in the shadows always catches up eventually, and no amount of running or changing your name can outrun the reality of your actions.
And that wraps up another conversation from Beyond the Grave. Thanks for joining us on the Headstones and Microphones podcast. Remember, do better with the life you have been given and choose to do good in this life. Please help spread the word by sharing and following the pod.